France, 1328. The king is dead. But what no chronicler recorded is what happened in the 3 hours before the official announcement. A royal physician stood outside the bedchamber of Charles IV at 3 in the morning, holding a sealed letter ordered to be delivered the instant the king stopped breathing. Addressed to a Flemish merchant in Bruges, it contained a single sentence: "The old tree has fallen. Plant the English seed." Nobody confirmed who wrote that letter, but what historians noted for centuries is that Edward III assembled a complete legal claim to the French throne within 14 days of Charles IV's death. 14 days. A case that would normally take months to build. Either Edward had extraordinary lawyers, or he had known this throne would be empty long before anyone else in Europe did. Philip of Valois was crowned Philip VI in May 1328. Edward attended and paid homage publicly. But 3 separate witness accounts record the same moment. As Edward rose from his knees, he leaned close to Philip and said something that made the new King of France go pale in front of his entire assembled court. The accounts disagree on the exact words. One records simply, "Enjoy it while it lasts." For 9 years, Edward III built in silence. Flemish merchant alliances on France's northern border, marriages into the Holy Roman Empire, Italian bankers funding his preparation quietly. According to 2 independent historians, he did something more calculated. English agents spent 18 months feeding Philip VI fabricated reports of English military buildup in Gascony, designed to goad France into firing the first shot, so England could fight as the wronged party. The plan, if it was a plan, worked. In May 1337, Philip confiscated Gascony and declared war, believing he was responding to English aggression. That evening, Edward III held a private dinner at Windsor for 7 men whose names appear in no other royal record. No titles, no offices. The household account notes only that considerable wine was consumed, and that the king was in unusually good spirits. The celebration nobody was supposed to know about. One man tried to stop what was coming. A French knight named Geoffroy de Charny spent 2 years at the English court watching the archers train every Sunday. He measured their draw weights, timed their rate of fire, mapped their ranges across different weather. He sent Philip VI a written report with one instruction at the top in capital letters: "This weapon will kill our cavalry." Philip filed it away and never mentioned it again. The Battle of Sluys in 1340 destroyed the entire French fleet and gave England control of the Channel. But what nobody discussed afterward was what soldiers found locked in the captain's cabin of the captured French flagship. A sealed box was brought to Edward personally. His secretary wrote that the king's reaction was the most controlled expression of fury he had ever witnessed. Edward sealed the box under his personal mark and said 4 words: "Burn the ship, keep the box." Whatever was inside that box was never entered into any official record. It appears in English royal inventory lists as late as 1402, described only as the Flemish box. After that, nothing. Some historians believe it contained intelligence proving Philip VI had advanced knowledge of English naval movements. Others believe it was personal. The box vanished from history and took its secret with it. Edward never spoke of it again. Edward's 1346 campaign burned across Normandy toward Paris. He stopped 30 miles from the city, close enough that smoke from burning villages was visible from the palace walls. Then he turned away and marched north. He had not come to take Paris. He had come to make Philip VI smell his own failure from his own window, to stand outside the most powerful city in Europe and leave by choice. The armies met at Crécy 4 days later. The night before the battle, August 25, 1346, Edward dismissed his commanders early. A sentry outside his tent reported hearing the king speaking quietly inside for over an hour after everyone had gone. not prayer, something more like a man going through a list. Alone in the dark, on the eve of the battle that would define his reign and change the shape of warfare forever, Edward III was talking to himself about something nobody was permitted to hear. The following morning, Edward rode the full length of his battle line and stopped at every company of archers. He asked each captain one question and one question only. "What is your range today?" Every captain gave him a number adjusted for that morning's wind and humidity. Edward nodded and moved on without another word. He was calibrating his weapon the way a craftsman checks each tool before the most important work of his life. The Genoese crossbow commander at Crécy was a mercenary named Carlo Grimaldi. Before the battle, he formally requested time to dry his men's bowstrings, which had gone slack on the march. Refused twice. He then told the French commander directly, "If you send us forward in this condition, we will die, and then your cavalry will charge over our bodies, and they will die too." The French commander replied, "You are paid to obey, not to advise." Grimaldi formed his men up and led them into 5,000 English arrows. He survived. Most of his men did not. When the Genoese broke and fled, Philip VI ordered his cavalry to charge over them. History has always called this blind rage. But a French chronicler 30 years later claimed Philip gave the order not from fury, but from fear. Fear that the Genoese, having seen the English position at close range, would sell their observations to Edward if allowed to retreat alive. The French cavalry charged 15 times. 15 times the longbowmen destroyed them before they reached the English line. Late in the battle, a nobleman named Jean de Hainaut assembled 800 cavalry who had not yet fought and rode to Philip. He said, "We still have 800 fresh horses. Send us now to the English right flank and we can break them." Philip looked at the 800. Then he rode away without answering. Hainaut watched him go. Philip survived the battle but was destroyed by it. The man who had filed away de Charny's warning, who had ordered his own mercenaries killed, who had ridden away from his last chance to win, now faced a kingdom that had watched its greatest army shattered by farmers with wooden bows. He died 3 years later, leaving his son John II a war, a debt, and an enemy who had stopped being afraid of France somewhere around the Third Cavalry Charge. The Black Prince at Poitiers in 1356 has always been celebrated as inspired improvisation. But the English were not surprised by the French king's approach. They had been told. A French-born clerk working inside the household of one of John II's senior commanders had been feeding information to English agents in Bordeaux for 2 years. The English called him the Notary. He reported the route. He reported the size of the army, and one crucial detail above everything else. The Notary told English intelligence that John II had ordered his lords to dismount and fight on foot, having studied Crécy. The Black Prince received this information weeks before the battle. He chose his ground at Poitiers specifically because the approach was uphill, and a French knight in full plate armor walking uphill in August heat was worth half a mounted knight before a single arrow flew. The great victory of Poitiers was not improvised. It was prepared. When John II was finally taken in the melee, his 14-year-old son Philip had fought beside him throughout and refused to release his father's hand even as English soldiers closed in from every direction. The boy who held his father's hand in the mud at Poitiers grew up to become Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. His descendants would eventually betray France to England in the next generation of this same war. The wound of one afternoon took 60 years to become a catastrophe. The Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 gave England a third of France. Edward III had started this war with a claim nobody took seriously, outlasted 2 French kings, built a weapon system that destroyed the military tradition of an entire continent, and captured one king while humiliating another. He had won more French territory than any English king before or since. The man who celebrated Philip's declaration of war with a private dinner at Windsor had earned every cup. But the war was not finished. It would never be finished in Edward's lifetime. The French, under the new king Charles V, began taking back territory through politics and patience rather than open battle. The Black Prince fell ill and spent his final years unable to fight. Edward III died in 1377, watching everything he had won erode. According to his physician, the king spent his final days alone before his map of France, moving his finger between cities won and cities lost. He died asking a question the physician could not answer. He asked, "Where did I lose it?" The physician wrote afterward that what struck him was not the question, but the tone. Not angry, not desperate, genuinely puzzled, as if the man who had planned everything, who had perhaps engineered this war before the French king, was cold, who had whispered something at a coronation that turned a rival white, had simply failed to include one variable. The variable was time.